Spring training is off to the races for the Philadelphia Phillies as expectations are beginning to build for this coming season. But on the horizon, there are some massive decisions that need to be made regarding the future of the franchise and some of the key pieces at stake. With each of these players having a chance to speak to the media for the first time, we're getting an idea of where each of their heads are at and how that could impact this coming season for this Philadelphia Phillies team. So with the most notable names as far as these extension talks come, names like JT Realmuto, names like Kyle Schwarber, names like Nick Castellanos, even Bryce Harper wanting a piece of the action as well, although he is well under control for several years to come. But do want to dive into what each of these guys are saying, as well as everything else, and why I think this could have a pretty seismic shift in what the future direction is for the franchise. About to dive into everything about that right here on Phillies Digest. Before I get to it, do want to make sure you guys are smashing that subscribe button if you have not already. We are ramping up and getting fully ready for this Philly season to take its full swing. Retired Eagles parade in the rear view. We got to celebrate the Super Bowl, but it is now baseball season. So ready to dive in on all the action and want as many of you as possible a part of it. Right now, 74.4% of you guys watching these videos have not hit that subscribe button just yet. So let's get that changing and let's talk some baseball. So to get things started off, I do want to start with this quote from Kyle Schwarber, who is pretty much at the forefront of the line for these extension talks and a guy who will be a free agent at the conclusion of the season. And this article on Bleacher Report writes, Philadelphia Phillies veteran slugger Kyle Schwarber will be a free agent after the 2025 season, but he's hoping his time in the city of brotherly love extends beyond this year. Per Todd Zielecki of MLB.com, Schwarber recently expressed his desire to receive a contract extension from the Phillies, but he's focused on trying to help the team win a World Series title. Quote, We'll see, Schwarber said. I know there's interest on our side. We'll see what happens throughout the camp. If they approach us and we get deeper and deeper into discussion, the best line I've ever heard on that is from John Lester. The best way to get paid is to win, so I'll just focus on that. It's what I've always been focused on. And I do like this quote from Schwarber, and to continue on in the article, it writes, the Phillies posted the second best record in the MLB in 2024 at 95-67, but they fell to the New York Mets in the National League Division Series in 4 games. Schwarber is coming off a strong season in which he hit 248 with 38 home runs and a career-high tying 104 RBIs. While Philadelphia is expected to be competitive again this season, the team didn't make splashy changes to its roster this offseason like other NL powerhouses such as the Los Angeles Dodgers and the New York Mets. Still, Schwarber is confident the Phillies will be able to put the pieces together to contend for the title this season. Quote, I feel like the pickups we've made have been quality, Schwarber said, and obviously we lost some quality people, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to us. We know that we have a good team. It's just going to come down to us figuring out a way to get us where we want to be. And I do think that this was the overall sentiment of the offseason, is the core is in place for this season, and you got to make some pretty significant changes and decisions if you are going to shift from that. For all the talks about Alec Boehm, the trade conversations that were rampant this offseason, that only works if you're getting an upgrade from Alec Boehm. And while Boehm has his flaws, is far from a perfect player, and that is a guy that I'm really curious to see how this season transpires for Boehm as a whole, particularly when factoring in the kind of, I don't want to say head case moments, but certainly a guy who has lost his composure at stretches far more than you expect for a professional baseball player, and with all these whispers, that is going to be a really interesting conversation. Now, as it goes to Kyle Schwarber, I don't think there's any doubts about what a foundational part of this Phillies team, that while Bryce Harper is the complete face of the franchise, I think there's a lot of ways in which Schwarber is a more important leader to this Phillies organization, a guy who plays the game the right way, carries himself the right way, and it's no coincidence why everywhere he goes ends up winning a lot of baseball games. So I do think Schwarber is going to be a significant piece this year, and the larger story in regard to him is really where he's going to hit in the order. There's still a lot of buzz about a potential lineup shakeup. I understand that conceptually from the standpoint of needing to get more production out of the same quality of players or same exact players really here, is if there would be an advantage to moving Trey Turner back to the one spot, giving him a try at more of a traditional lean-up type. And in that same conversation here, it is surprising me there's not any more buzz about Bryce Harper potentially being that guy, as we could lean into the other side of the conversation, in which the tactic is, and that this has sort of been the mindset with Kyle Schwarber, is get your best hitter up to the plate the maximum amount of times as possible. What does surprise me, Bryce has not entered that mix. Now, when regarding Bryce Harper, this is another name that we've heard enter the extension waters, and he was asked about this in the locker room. Shout out to Tim Kelly of On Pattison, and Bryce said, quote, I think that's a question for Scott and John and Dave, Harper said. I'm here to play baseball. I'm here to understand that we're trying to win a World Series. If that gets done this year or any other year, we want that to get done. Now, granted, for Bryce particularly here, he's not going anywhere. He wants to retire in Philadelphia. We know the story. He wanted no opt-outs. He wanted no chance to move on from this organization ever, and that's exactly what he's getting here. So I don't necessarily feel the sense of urgency to make sure we're tacking on years to that contract that still has plenty still to go. fine to have the conversation in the locker room. And if Bryce wants it on the dotted line, I'm also not going to be the guy to dig my foot in and say, no, we're not giving you extra years. But I do think when you factoring the order of operations of prioritizing what needs to get done around the MLB or on this Phillies team right now, pretty deep down on the list, I would say there. Now, with that being said, in fairness to Bryce, I'm sure he feels or, sees the same tweets we do at some of these notable numbers. Juan Soto, $750 million, and thinks, man, maybe I missed out a little bit. Maybe I should be rewarded a little for my loyalty, my trust in this organization, and what he has successfully built here. That has been who Bryce Harper has been. He's been the face of the franchise to every extent of it. So I feel that as well. But there is another guy that I thought was particularly interesting to hear his thoughts on it, and that being Nick Castellanos. Now, I don't have the video for you here, but Nick Castellanos was asked why he chose to represent himself. This is sort of an interesting storyline that I think has gone under the radar. He was a Scott Boras client, who obviously Scott Boras, one of the premier names in representation and agencies for all of sports there, a guy who has the most lucrative deals. In fact, was the guy behind that Juan Soto contract. And Cassie was asked, why did he elect to represent himself? And I actually thought his answer was pretty thoughtful. And for Nick Castellanos as a whole, this sort of has become a theme to me, that yes, it is all blunt in your face, that he does not sugarcoat things, but there is some real deal logic, and, he stands on what his morals are, what his principles are, and what his thought processes are for each of these answers. That was the case in this one, in which he said, I just want open dialogue between myself and my employer, the guy in control of making those decisions. And for this specific summer, how did that go down? That I could see my name in trade reports. I could see those articles being written, shipping me off to other organizations. So it was simple as I wanted to hit Dave right there, say, is this true? Is there any truth to it? And obviously, there was not for any of those situations. That while I'm sure there were some conversations had about Nick Castellanos, I do think this was, you're not doing better than what he's providing to this team. And frankly, you can make a pretty strong argument that he was the best player in this Phillies playoff run last year, hit the ball at an incredible rate. And while we know the hot streaks and the low streaks are still there, that there will be stretches where it looks like he can't hit a fastball if it was right down the middle of the plate there. There's also stretches where he looks like one of the best hitters in the sport of baseball. And I don't think he gets enough credit for how much he's improved defensively, by the way. This dude has turned himself into at least a league average right fielder to this point. I would even go as far as to take it a little further than that and would say he's an above average right fielder, which is pretty foreign from what you would expect when he first came to Philadelphia. Let's not forget the first standard basically being the Phillies tactic of loading up as many DHs as possible, the guys that are just going to mash home runs and figure it out in the field. That is how things have been played out, and a lot of this would not work out quite as favorably if it was not for Nick Castellanos' commitment on that side of the ball. Now, to have the bigger picture conversation, to want to take a look at this salary cap outlook for this Phillies team, and you can see the core is still locked up. And what I mean by that is the core, it is Zack Wheeler, it is Bryce Harper, it is Trey Turner, and it is Aaron Nola. Those guys are not going anywhere in the short-term future. That is basically the foundation of how this team is established. Then beyond that is when the decisions need to be made. That JT Realmuto will be an undrafted free agent unrestricted free agent after this year. And I understand the logic behind, and I know Luke just dropped an awesome video to make sure to check out his full thoughts on the potential of making him into a left fielder. The JT conversation as a whole, I'll also add here, while I understand it's very clear that JT is in his decline at his age at the catcher position, it's a rarity to see production, even to the level that he's still delivering, but there's no doubt that he is not what he once was. With that being said, look around the major leagues, guys. There is really not that many high-quality options at the catcher position, and I still would argue that JT gives this team a better chance to win than basically any of the realistic alternatives that we can throw out there. So in theory, would I absolutely be on board upgrading a catcher, finding another player to make that, the catcher of the future? For sure. I just realistically and logistically don't see those options out there. So for the short-term fix, I think you keep rocking with a deteriorating JT Realmuto and see how much longer he can hang behind the plate. But that will be an interesting conversation to go into this offseason. And I am curious how much they push that left field concept. If that is something they truthfully rely on a regular basis, will be very interesting to see how that shakes out. Moving beyond, we mentioned Nick Castellanos. There is that additional deal after just this season, so a little bit of a different situation for him. Kyle Schwarber, as we just spoke about and read his quotes, that he will be an undrafted free agent, or unrestricted free agent. That is a guy who would be at the top of my personal wish list here. That Schwarber, I do not want to see in another uniform outside the Phillies for the remainder of his career. And the names continuing down the list, all not quite as notable. Did want to bring it all the way down to Alec Boehm, has one more arbitration year. I think for this season as a whole and what kind of the message should be, I don't want to say taking a step back from an expectation standpoint, but from a roster construction standpoint, I do think this is what it was. It was take a step back this year to launch forward 2 steps forward next year. Whether or not that is the right outcome will be interesting to see, but I do think that is the tactic from the Phillies, is they want these guys to dog it out. They want them to earn their roster spots. And for all these frustrations and concerns and desire for there to be changes, that only works if you can move on at particular positions. They could not sign a third baseman because Alec Bohm had that position locked down unless you're bringing in better, and then that isn't the best usage of assets if you're paying however $1 million for both of those third basemen there. For a guy like Kyle Schwarber, as great as he is, he also hogs up that DH position, which obviously would bring a ton of flexibility if you could make Bryce Harper the DH or think that is the right answer based on the status of his shoulder or whatever the case may be. Nick Castellanos, maybe he is more effective at the DH spot. The point being here that this is sort of a puzzle that has to all move around, so I think they're letting the board clear a little bit from a financial standpoint for this season and going to allow all these guys to go through it. So I do like that the conversations are being had, but frankly, I don't know if I expect any of these extension talks to heat up that quickly. This feels to me like something that will stretch out over maybe even the entirety of the season and linking into the actual offseason before those Phillies address the actual outcome there. So ultimately, we will see how things shake out. But good to see the boys back at spring training. Good to see the baseball's finally starting to get to build, and do appreciate each and every guys tuning into this. So before we do sign off, do want to remind you guys one more time to make sure you're smashing that subscribe button if you have not just yet. Once again, 74.4% of you guys watching this videos have not subscribed to Phillies Digest just yet. It is baseball season. It is here. We're ready to dive into it wholeheartedly. So want each and every one of you along for the ride. So smash that subscribe button, drop a like on this video, and me and Luke will be back talking to you next time. Peace.